Book Gamma, which is the fourth book in the Metaphysics by Aristotle, begins to crystallize the new unified science that Aristotle is creating. This science is metaphysics, also known as first philosophy because it studies the first or most fundamental things. Note that Aristotle himself never uses the word metaphysics. This word was added to the text by later editors. Aristotle begins chapter 1 of Book Gamma by writing, "There is a kind of science whose remit is being qua being." This describes the science of metaphysics. Qua means in virtue of or under the aspect of. Being means existence itself. Consequently, the science of being qua being is that which studies existence under the aspect of existence, not under the aspect of any more particular science. Being qua mathematics would be the study of the existence of mathematical entities. Being qua being studies all types of existence, including that from mathematics. Now, Aristotle remarks that the fundamental duty of the philosopher is to gain possession of the principles and causes of substance. Truly knowing the fundamental principles of substance requires knowing the fundamental principles of truth. The most fundamental principle of truth, which is the primary principle of logic, is the law of non-contradiction. Aristotle first expresses this principle in the following way. It is impossible for the same thing at the same time both to be in and not to be in the same thing in the same respect. To illustrate Aristotle's statement, it is impossible for water to be in a particular cup and simultaneously not to be in that cup in the same way. It is important to include the at the same time or simultaneous qualification because it is possible for water to be in a cup and not to be in the cup at different times. Aristotle spends the next three chapters attempting to defend and establish the truth of the law of non-contradiction. In chapter 4, Aristotle declares in astonishment that some philosophers do not believe the principle of non-contradiction to be true. They hold that it is possible for the same thing to be and not to be. Not everything can be proved, Aristotle asserts, but the principle of non-contradiction can be proved. Aristotle's first proof of the principle of non-contradiction is the following. When a person uses the expression to be a man, it has one definite meaning. To be a man means, for instance, to be two-legged. If the expression not to be a man had the same meaning as to be a man, it would make both expressions meaningless. It would mean that language can no longer function and mutual communication is eliminated. Moreover, it would make thought impossible. A man cannot think unless he thinks of something. Therefore, as language does function, a term such as man necessarily has one definitive meaning when expressed. This necessity means that to be a man cannot have another meaning, such as not to be a man. Therefore, if we say this is a man, then it is impossible for it to be at the same time true that this is not a man. If something is A, then it cannot be not A. This is the principle of non-contradiction. By examining this function of language, Aristotle declares that we have our proof of the principle of non-contradiction. The reason is that it is not possible to say truly at the same time that the same thing both is and is not a man. The reader may argue that one word may have several meanings. Such a word is known as a homonym, such as star. Star can mean a bright heavenly body, or it can mean a famous actor or musician. Aristotle deals with this circumstance by saying that though homonyms exist, when a person expresses a statement, that person means a single thing by the term used. In chapter 5, Aristotle defends the principle of non-contradiction against the relativism of the ancient Greek philosopher Protagoras. Protagoras is known for saying, man is the measure of all things. This statement is what is meant by relativism above. There is no absolute truth but only people's interpretations or measures of things. Aristotle, in contrast, believes that absolute truth exists. From a relativist point of view, it might be said that the two statements, the wine is sweet and the wine is not sweet, are both simultaneously true because for one person it tastes sweet, but for another it does not taste sweet. The sweetness is relative to the taster. This idea seems to break the principle of non-contradiction. Something is at the same time both A and not A means sweet for some people and not sweet for some people. Aristotle's answer to this is that people must separate the taste of wine from the wine itself. The wine itself does not have contradictory properties, so it is not true to say that the wine itself is both sweet and not sweet, which would be a contradiction. Sweetness or lack thereof is a property of the taster, not the wine. The same wine will elicit different tastes. Consequently, rather than stating the wine is both sweet and not sweet, a person should properly say that the wine tastes sweet to some and not sweet to others. This last statement is not a contradiction, Thus, the principle of non-contradiction holds true once someone has corrected their use of language. In chapter 7, Aristotle moves on to advancing another core principle of logic, the principle of excluded middle. This law states that a statement is either true or false, and there can be no third or middle possibility. To illustrate Aristotle's principle, the reader can consider the statement, Arthur is a human. By the principle of excluded middle, this statement must be either true or false, and there can be no middle option. Whereas the principle of non-contradiction asserts that a statement cannot simultaneously be true and false, the principle of excluded middle asserts that a statement must be either true or false. Aristotle seeks to defend the principle of excluded middle again by appealing to the claim that an expressed word or term has a particular meaning. If a term such as Arthur has one meaning, then a statement about that term is either true or false. It is not possible to grant a middle option between truth and falsity without changing the very meaning of the word. If people change the meanings of words, they make communication by language impossible. However, language is possible because it exists. Therefore, words have definite meanings, and therefore the principle of excluded middle is true. In chapter 8, Aristotle is keen to defend the existence of real truth because some say that nothing is true and others claim that everything is true. Both of these viewpoints are false, Aristotle claims, because they each destroy themselves. To state that nothing is true implies that that very statement is not true. To state that everything is true implies that the contrary statement, everything is false, is also true, which would mean the initial statement is not true. As readers have seen so far, first philosophy is the investigation of fundamental substances, fundamental causes, and fundamental principles. In book Gamma, Aristotle has investigated two of the fundamental principles of logic, non-contradiction and the principle of excluded middle. This investigation thus contributes to the content of first philosophy or metaphysics.